Now, you mentioned Apple Daily's reporting kind of helped you change your mind about China. What did you think about China beforehand? Like, what was that change?
Well, that's definitely a very interesting question. And I think a question a lot of people from my generation does not really want to confront and answer, because I think, to be honest, a lot of people from my generation used to think China could be changed one day, right? And could be democratized one day. And I was actually born in 1997. So exactly the year of the handover of Hong Kong from the Chinese government, from the British government to the Chinese government. And I think, throughout the time that I was growing up, there were a lot of propaganda events that would glorify how China has come, in progress in terms of its economics, in terms of opening it up, and to be more open-minded, to be more liberal. So I think there was a period of time that Hong Kong people were generally hopeful. And the Chinese government also tried to do a lot of things to win over the hearts of Hong Kongers, like, sending pandas to Hong Kong, the Hong Kong park, so that people can go and see them and think, oh, thank you, China, for doing that for us.
It's always the pandas.
Exactly, always the pandas. And, those things just built up, around my life. And eventually, until I think even the Chinese Olympics in 2008, that really made a lot of Hong Kongers felt that China would have a future that is, vibrant, prosperous, whatever, because everyone saw, the huge architectural achievement, and also the huge success actually the Olympics was. But of course, later on, we realized, there were a lot of also scandals about, a fake singer on stage, dancers or performers being, exploited during the performance, a lot of things like that. But I would say, once my generation was kind of proud to be, under the leadership of the Chinese government.
That's very interesting to hear, because when we were there in 2014, we saw how many people from your generation were protesting and seemed very clear-eyed about the Chinese Communist Party, especially by 2019 when they were directly calling out the Chinese Communist Party itself. What happened? How did people sort of change their minds?
Yeah, I think, a lot of things happened. So one of that was in 2012, the Chinese government actually tried to impose this new program called the National Education onto Hong Kongers, especially people who are still in school. So of course, we know what national education meant was they were trying to turn Hong Kongers patriotic. They were trying to have this new narrative of a prosperous China that would not talk about the June 4th massacre, for example, imposed onto school campuses of Hong Kongers. And I think that really rang a bell for a lot of Hong Kongers, especially for kids, for teenagers, because back in school, we had to do, a lot of assignments about catching up with the news. And so we started to learn a lot more about, how China has been corrupted, how China treated Liu Xiaobo, for example. But that, I think even for those news, we thought there was some sort of distance, right, with what was going on inside of China. Because after all, there was this facade of the one country, two system, that Hong Kong would be different. But then this national education program came, and all of a sudden it's like, come on, you have to wake up, otherwise you're just gonna become, another part of China, another city of China. And I think from that point onwards, Hong Kongers, especially teenagers, really started fighting, because we don't want to sit in a classroom to learn about how to glorify the CCP, and we also don't want to, sing the national anthem like they want us to. It's just unbelievable. And that's why I think people started to change and realize something is wrong. We have to wake up. And that's why a lot of people started going onto the streets in 2014. But I think even in 2014, there was a huge turning point, which was actually using tear gas. I've spoken to a lot of my friends who were, a bit ambivalent about politics back then, and they were not sure if they were supportive of the government or the protest. But on September 28th, when the government started using tear gas on students who were peaceful, I think the public sentiment really changed. And a lot of people really started choosing a side of the students and the protests, because the violence is just, uncalled for and unwarranted. And from that point onwards, the government kept on using more and more police force and police violence, and more people woke up, with that very blatant image of violence and tear gas and whatnot and rubber bullets. And so I think it's actually an accumulation of miscalculations and missteps from the government. If they had not used, the national education scheme, the police violence, I'm actually fairly certain that there would still be some people in my generation that are fairly sympathetic actually to the Chinese government and would feel a connection to them. But because they came in too aggressively, especially after Xi Jinping came into power, a lot of people from my generation really bounced back and changed completely to support the other way, which is, to not trust the Chinese government at all.
It's interesting you talk about feeling like they came in very aggressively, because I remember I was in China summer of 97 visiting relatives, and there was this big push about feeling proud and patriotic that Hong Kong was finally coming back to China. Like, I remember there was a big song that was like very popular in karaoke that was about, the lyrics or something about it. In 1997, you'll return to me. Like, so it was this like big, happy family reunion type of feeling, right? And a lot of places were also playing like the Pearl of the Orient song, which was like the Hong Kong song. So it was very much like, oh, like this is like a big, happy family reunion. It seemed like when they first started, they wanted to capitalize on that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling of like, oh, the British were outsiders. There was like colonial power.
Yeah.
So like now we're finally together again. And then just kind of seeing that, like trying to come in with the soft power, but eventually they just couldn't keep going with that. They had to come in with the harsh, like, all right, well, now it's time for the propaganda. Now it's time for,
They should have stuck with the pandas, Shelley.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, yeah, that is crazy. From what you're saying, it sounds like if they just hadn't done anything, they would have gotten basically everything they want.
Well, but except that then they wouldn't, right? Because if they hadn't tried to push any communist policies, then they wouldn't be able to really run Hong Kong.
If they're trying to do the patriotic education, like if they had just not done that.
But if they didn't do that, then they wouldn't start transforming Hong Kong society.
Right. And the whole point is that they wanted to transform Hong Kong to be more like they had always wanted to transform Hong Kong to be more like the rest of communist China, right? And so they had to take steps at some point to do that.
Well, except by doing that, they activated a whole generation politically.
Yeah, I think I would almost say that they didn't expect it, except they should have, because in 2003, when they tried to pass Article 23 and 500,000 people went on the street, like that should have been a sign. And I guess maybe it was kind of because they
backed off for a long time after that.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Well, I'm curious then, what was it that got you politically activated?
Yeah, I think a lot of it really had to do with kind of seeing how Hong Kong has changed so drastically over the years. Because one thing I remember was I have been studying abroad since 2014 in Norway and in the United States. But for every break, I would go back home and, see how the streets have changed. And I think, every year when I went home for a holiday, I realized I would hear more and more Mandarin on the streets. I would see more and more simplified Chinese on the billboards. And then I just realized, my home has been changing a lot, but it seems nobody is very aware of it. And even when I was, studying in high school or secondary school in Hong Kong, I could see how the news, in the news, there were a lot of different events happening, but still people have been living their lives, kind of relatively in a satisfied way that they wouldn't really take note of what was happening. So I started trying to do a bit of political campaigning in my school campuses just to get more thoughts or, more input from peers around me. But I think the real moment that changed me was in 2019. So in June, when the movement first started. And in fact, at that time, I was actually stuck here in the US. And I was studying in, the New York University at the time. So I was in the New York City. And I was, just checking the online forums, Facebook Lives, and, texting with my friends who were all on the ground. And I just felt so alienated, and I felt so useless and powerless because I knew a very tough time is ahead of them. But I could not be part of that. And I could not be there to taste the tear gas with them. And I could not really be there, just be part of my friend group.
Real quick, I tasted the tear gas. You're not missing out. Would not recommend. 0 out of 10.
Yeah. But I think but you said that, but I still really, really wanted to be there to taste the tear gas with everyone. Just because I want to be part of, this Hong Konger movement. But out of desperation, I started to do a lot of online campaigning, global campaigning. First, it was more innocent, like writing letters to the UN, writing letters to Congress members, that kind of grassroots efficacy. But later on, there was this huge global campaign where we were trying to put Hong Kongers' demands onto the front page of all major newspapers around the world. So that includes like New York Times, Financial Times, all of those newspapers. So we actually did that. We put up, newspaper headlines in like 13 countries around the world. And that only took us 5 days, from the crowdfunding to the design to actually publishing it and everything.
I remember those ads, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I still have some at home, actually. But that was, really the start. And I think once you're in it, you can only go further. You cannot really back out from it, because you started forming connections with people. You started forming friendships. And that kind of friendships is always what drives you, to go further, because your friend is like, oh, are you in? And of course, they'll say, yeah, I'm in. Hell yeah, let's go. And that's when you start, stepping deeper and deeper into it. And so I started helping, supporting protesters on the ground. I would have 9 different videos of the actual real-time broadcast in front of me of where the police are. And I would just I would analyze all of their positions, and then let my friends know on the ground, hey, there's going to be, an ambush in front of you. So don't go forward, move backward, or move right, don't move left, some sort of things like that. So I actually felt like a surveillance officer from the CCP for a while, but that was what I did. And I also started, supplying gears, protective gears to people in Hong Kong, such and such. And that's when I started doing more political organizing. But after the national security law, actually, a lot of my teammates and friends got arrested back home. And I looked around and then I realized, oh my God, there's only me left. I'm actually the only person left on the team. And so I started to think what I could do more. Also, I was anonymous back then. And I did not want to risk, my life or my safety, or, I did not want to give up the freedom or possibility of going back to Hong Kong. But eventually I realized that is gone. I have to put it, I have to leave it aside. I have to focus on helping my folks. I have to focus on helping the city. And that's why I started, becoming a bit more public. I joined the Hong Kong Democracy Council to do more advocacy work. But that's basically my story. But I think also the story of many other Hong Kongers is really for the people we love, and for the city, the home that we grew up with, because it's unbearable and it's unimaginable to think that my home has become in such a state. But yeah, that's kind of the story and the gist of how I got here.